Welcome back, everyone. In the last video, we learned about how to leverage this new pattern from useState, where we create some object that allows us to keep track of multiple fields inside of our form. Due to the fact that there was overlap between the name and the value that we had generated, we were able to create this easy, simple shorthand method of storing and setting this uniform object that we had in our form. In this video, what we're going to do is utilize this form field in order to actually authenticate our user with their email and password. So one thing I want you to notice is that here we are keeping the same values that we know we need for our create user document from auth method. This user auth, as we know, sets a display name and an email, and the created at is generated inside. But primarily what needs to be passed through is display name and email. For us here inside of our new sign-in, what we do need is very similar. We needed the display name, we needed the email, but now with password and confirm password, the thing to remember here is we don't actually want to store these inside of our database. This is considered sensitive information. Instead, what we want to do is we want to leverage Firebase's authentication, which will figure out whether or not the password matches with the user. But they obfuscate that from us so that even if somehow our Firebase gets hacked or our Firestore gets hacked, our passwords don't get leaked and it's not a security concern for us. So that's a great functionality as well of Firestore. Now, what we want to do is we want to leverage all these default form fields that we've set up and actually authenticate the user, which means we're going to need to leverage new utilities inside of our Firebase utils. So as we saw before, when we were using Firebase auth, we introduced the sign in with redirect and sign in with pop-up methods. These methods took some specific provider that told us which external provider we were trying to sign in with. Maybe it was Facebook, maybe it was Google. Well, it was Google, in fact, for us, but maybe it could be GitHub or any of those other options. Here, when you look inside of your actual console and you look at the sign-in methods, when we added the provider, these are considered native providers, which means that we don't actually need to supply a provider. These come by default with Firebase auth. So all we need then is not another provider instance, but we just need the method. Now, this method we're going to import is actually aptly named create user with email and password. And let me show you how to use it. It's pretty simple. First, what we want to do is we want to create another function. And I want to call it something explicit, like create auth user with email and password. Because as we know, what we're making is a authenticated user inside of our Firebase Authentication tab. This is not necessarily a user document inside of our Firestore instance. So here I'm being more explicit about what this function will do. It's going to be an async function because we're going to be setting some values asynchronously inside of Firebase. And here, what I want you to notice is that I tend to create these methods inside of this utility file. And the reason why I do this is because it allows me to control the large majority of how my application interfaces with this external service. In this particular case, the external service is Firebase or Firestore or whichever other service inside of Firebase that I'm working with. The reason why I do this is because it allows me to create this separation layer between my front end as well as the services it relies on. Let's say, for example, Google Firebase decided to change some of these methods. Now what happens is that suddenly my application might start breaking without me noticing. However, if I've more clearly defined where my code is going to directly interact with the underlying service. So in this particular case, creating user documents from auth. Let's take this example. What happens if some of the way that we get these documents change? Let's say they change up the methodology that we receive documents, the way that we fetch the data, the way that we determine whether or not some of the data or maybe even the reference exists or not. Let's say all of this changes. Does that mean that we have to refactor everywhere inside of our application that is now utilizing Firebase's authentication and to create this document? No, because now we can just change it in this one place. In this one place, I can figure out how it is that Firebase wants me to authenticate in a new way now and just modify it in one place, even if I call this method in more than one place. The other thing too is that if we look at a method like createAuthUser, this might be relatively simple. We know that with this method, or at least I know with this method, all I need to pass it is auth, an email string, and a password string. And Firebase is going to figure out how to authenticate this user. But what if they change this? What if they need more values to be added? Maybe there's more additional options that they extend. Maybe there's even more steps that get involved here. When this changes, again, all I need to do is modify this one function. But what I've done is I've protected my front-end application from this external service that's subject to change. Now it becomes much easier because I define how it is that this service is going to interface with my front-end application. I've added this utilities as essentially a layer in between my front-end code and this additional library that I'm working with. So here, for example, I know that what I want is an email and I also want a password. If I don't receive either of these things, meaning that if I don't get an email or if I don't get a password, then I want to exit. I don't want to call this method. And what I want to return is the awaited value from this method. Because here, once this authenticates, I want to see what I get back. But the key thing here is that I know this method will never call if I don't get an email value and I don't get a password value. Now, in a much later lesson in the course, we are going to learn about much more rigid ability to protect our code using TypeScript. But for now, I don't want you to think about that. It becomes too much to think about when we're already in the process of just learning React and a lot of the React ecosystem, as well as these front-end patterns. But I do want to highlight here that we are protectively focusing on how to defend our code. We can actually also do something similar inside of our create user auth document. Here we can say that if we don't get a user auth, we also want to return. So this is another way we can protect our code. But these are just different ways that we're saying if we do not receive any of these arguments, then just don't run the function. TypeScript kind of makes this significantly easier, but again, we'll explore that later, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But here at the very least, we now have this new method to create auth user with email and password. We pass it the auth, we pass it the email and the password, and then this will create an authenticated user and give us back some auth object. Inside of our signup form now, let's import in this method we just created. And let's pull this in from the appropriate place of our utils, Firebase utils. And now that you have this method, my challenge to you for this function right here is create it and figure out what's needed for this feature. This is actually going to be your first big challenge because we've learned a lot of the little bits that are required to make this work now. We've learned extensively how to work with Firebase enough that we have an idea of what the object we're going to get back if this is successful is going to be. And here, I just want you to think about these requirements. So first, let's just set up this method before I ask you to pause the video and give it a try yourself. I'm just going to call this handle submit. This is going to be a method that is going to leverage the form fields in order to actually create this method. So again, this is an async method because we're generating a user document inside of an external service. And it's an async method. And because it's going to trigger on this onSubmit event handler, we're going to get an event. So I'm going to teach you how to set up some of this basic stuff. The first thing we want to do is we want to prevent default. Essentially, we don't want any default behavior of the form. We are saying that all of what's going to happen in the form, we're going to handle. All we need you to do is just tell us when the form has been submitted. Once this event is prevented, there's a couple things you need to do. You need to confirm that the password matches because, again, they have to type the two passwords together. What we also need to do is we need to then actually see if we've authenticated that user with email and password. Then what we want to do is we want to create a user document from what this returns. So step by step, I want you to try and actually piece together this handle submit function yourself. We've done it before. We did it when we were using our sign-in component. It's going to be similar, except now you're just creating that authenticated user with email and password. So try it out. walk through it, use these fields of email, password, and don't forget to pass display name when you're actually trying to generate the document from what we get back from create auth user. But I just want you to play around and tinker with this actual function, test it yourself, and see if you can build out this feature. So once you've done that, join me in the next video when we'll do it together.